Hello to you. I do hope you are well, and a very warm welcome to this GCSE RE Unit 8 mock exam. I'm going to be talking you through step by step all 4 sections that will be on the exam, and I've got a variety of questions that I've put together that can help us to practice our knowledge and our key exam techniques. So make sure you click on the link down below, or you get yourself some paper and a pen to make some notes. And we're going to be walking our way through 4 sections of exam questions for GCSE RE Unit 8. And we start with section 1, which is on rights and responsibilities. And our question is, explain why Christians use a variety of moral authorities when making a moral decision. So a moral decision, first of all, what is a moral decision? Well, it's a decision that involves making a choice. You consciously choose to act in a certain way. So how might a Christian make a moral decision? So make this decision which is grounded in sort of moral beliefs, values and ideas. There are 4 key ways that a Christian will make a moral decision. It's vital you know what they are and you know a little bit about them. So let me just talk you through them all first of all. First we have situation ethics. That's the idea that you should do what you're going to do in that situation. So the idea you should do the most loving thing in every situation. So there isn't just a big set of rules, but in that situation you do the most loving thing. We then have the Bible, which is of course the holy book of Christians. We have the church, which is a community of Christians. And we have the conscience, which is your inner sense of the rightness or the wrongness of an action. So it's within you, what you feel inside. So why would you use these different sources of moral authority? Let's start with situation ethics. Remember, that's the idea put forward by Joseph Fletcher, that a Christian should do the most loving thing in that situation. So why would a Christian use situation ethics? Well, it's all about love and doing the most loving thing. And of course, Jesus, the key Christian figure, led by example on this. He taught to love your neighbour as yourself. What he did was very, very much all about love. So love is a key value in Christianity, and so Christians should try and show that wherever they can, and this includes in that situation. Situation ethics is about the idea we can't just say this is right, this is wrong. We need to judge it ourselves in that situation based on the principle of love being the most important thing. And there is a quote in the Bible that says, overcome evil with good. So the idea that goodness and love, kindness and compassion are the most important things. We move on to the Bible. Why would you use the Bible to make a moral decision? Well, first of all, it contains things like the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue. They are key Christian teachings on how to live your life. So it's an excellent point of reference that has not changed for thousands of years. So it's tried and trusted and tested, and it stands the test of time. The Bible also contains the New Testament that documents everything that Jesus did, and Christians try to emulate Jesus in how they live their lives. He is a the key Christian figure, and so if a Christian can live in a way that is thought to be Christ-like, namely representing his values of love, compassion and kindness, then they can live a good life. So a Christian may ask, what would Jesus do? They can consult the Bible to see what he did during his time on earth and perhaps take inspiration from that, as well as looking at other elements of the biblical text. Then we have the church. Remember, that's a community of Christians. There are 2 different ideas really. One of them could be that it's a group of like-minded people. So it's people like the priest, like the lay people who attend the church. They can give advice. They are, part of the same religion as you. So they can help you to come to sort of a conclusion based upon your faith. But also the church has a key role in taking the teachings, say, of the Bible and making them relevant for the modern world. For example, the Catholic Church has something called the Catechism. This is sort of a document that contains all the key teachings from the Catholic Church, which are all based on biblical teachings. So it's taking issues like homosexuality, euthanasia, abortion, using ancient scriptures and making the teachings relevant to today's world. So the church interprets the teachings of sort of the forefathers of the church, for example Jesus, and makes them relevant to modern life. Very important when someone is making a moral decision in the 21st century. And finally, the conscience, that in the sense of the rightness or the wrongness. Of course, you'd use it because it's unique to you, and of course, you're the one making the decision. St. Paul, a key Christian figure, said you should always use your conscience as sort of your last point of call, your last sort of thought before you actually do the action. So it should be part of sort of your whole decision-making process. And a Christian will believe that your conscience is God's voice within you. So it's the idea God is communicating to you about that situation. Important to know that the conscience is not always seen as right. For example, the Yorkshire Ripper, a mass murderer, believed God was telling him to commit the murders. Of course, Christians would dispute that idea that God will be telling someone to do something such as murder. So, say in the case of mental illness, it can be wrong. So it's important you know there are pros and cons to all of the ways of making a moral decision. We move on to our next question on rights and responsibilities, which is a B-type question, which means it's worth 4 marks, and it is a that is a D-type question. It is human rights law should always be in agreement with religious teachings. And the question, worth 6 marks, 3 and 3, is do you agree? So do you agree that human rights law should always be in agreement with religious teachings? So if you do agree with that statement, you might say that religion is all about showing love, compassion and kindness. And so our human rights laws should also be about showing love, compassion and kindness. These are not just religious ideas, but they are ideas that all of humanity should represent and should cherish. So it's not just unique to religion. Religion promotes fundamental ideas that we should all support, all take on board, regardless of if we are religious or not, or whatever our ethnicity or background is. Remember, human rights are the fundamental rights and freedoms to which everyone is entitled. You may also say God made humans in his image, according to Genesis. So the idea that all life is precious and holy, and so human rights are there to protect life, which is precious and holy. So they're sort of joined together. The idea that we need human rights because we recognise that humans do need to have their lives protected. Why? Because they are precious. Because a Christian would say life is given, it's created by God in his image. So religion sort of tells us why it's important to have human rights. Because, humans aren't just to be, thrown away, used as commodities. They do actually have real value. A Christian believes that comes from God's creation of humans in his image. And then things like the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, are an excellent framework for rules. So those 10 rules, they are timeless. They have been used again and again. For example, do not murder, do not commit sort of crimes, such as stealing. So the idea that these are an excellent framework on which to base human rights. So those are some ideas why human rights laws should be in agreement with religious teaching. Why might someone disagree with you for our second part of this question? Religious teachings are not always sort of in unison, in agreement with human rights laws. For example, the persecution of certain groups of people, such as those who are gay, may have come from religious teaching. Now, whilst the Catholic Church stresses that those who are homosexual should be respected and treated with sensitivity, it does say that homosexuality is never to be permitted. And some religious people, some extremists on sort of the extreme spectrum of religion can take that and say, well, we can say that, God rejects these people, and so they can discriminate. Things like abortion as well. It can lead to people being quite passionate and to violating human rights, so sort of, abusing people, getting quite angry with them because of religious teaching, which may be misinterpreted, but in extreme cases can form sort of the groundwork for discrimination towards certain people. Capital punishment is allowed in Islam. That is, of course, violating the right to life, regardless of what you've done. So sometimes religious ideas can conflict with what we see as universally acceptable human rights. And the idea that religion is basically or mainly based on ancient texts, such as the Bible, such as the Quran, and perhaps in today's modern world, they are not quite as applicable as, say, they were then. The idea that in the time when the Bible was written, attitudes to, say, women were incredibly different to the modern world today, and human rights need to be relevant, up to date, and really, really modern, as opposed to, say, ancient religious texts. So just some ideas there why you might not agree that human rights laws should always be in agreement with religious teaching. We've got an A-mark question for you to tackle now. The idea, what are electoral processes? And they are how voting is arranged so all people can vote. So it's how voting or elections are arranged within a democracy. Another key word, what are democratic processes? This is the way in which all citizens can take part in government. It's how everyone in society is able to have a say in the way society is run. So the key word there is democratic democracy. Democracy essentially means that everybody has a say. The idea it's democratic. We all get to have a say in how the country is run, as opposed to, say, a dictatorship or autocratic leadership, which sees sort of the powerful making all the decisions. In a democracy, all citizens have a say in how the country is governed. Really key information there. And finally, another key word for you, what is a pressure group? A pressure group is a group formed to influence government policy and decision making on a particular issue. For example, on a certain environmental issue, you may have a pressure group lobbying the government, trying to influence the government on the decisions they're making on that issue. So it's a group formed to really pressure the government on a certain area of policy and decision making. Our final question on section 1 is a B-type question. We've got there now. And it is, do you think Christians should support genetic engineering? So first of all, what is genetic engineering? And it is the process where the structure and characteristics of genes are changed. Genes can be added, replaced, or taken away. Also important, you know that a clone is an exact copy of something else. So, what might a Christian think about genetic engineering? Well, if they were saying yes, they do think that genetic engineering should be supported, they may refer to the idea that humans have been given dominion by God. Key quote alert for you. In Genesis, it is said, they may rule over all the creatures. The idea God has given humans dominion, that's control and power and authority over creation, and with that he has given them sort of an intelligence and a responsibility to do good. So God has left us with this responsibility that they may rule over all the creatures, so humans must make decisions that will benefit humans and the world. And a Christian may think that in certain circumstances genetic engineering will do good. Also, you may use the idea that Jesus healed people. He sort of raised people from the dead. He healed the bleeding woman. Parables like that. And Christians should always be asking, what would Jesus do? St. Teresa of Avila, key quote here, said, Christ has no body but yours. The idea that Jesus Christ, that key Christian figure, is not alive today. And so what we should be doing as Christians, if you're Christian, is emulating his example. And he healed, so Christians today should be doing the same. How can they heal? How can they help people in need? Well, genetic engineering is one example, perhaps, of how that can be done. However, a Christian may not support genetic engineering. They may use the idea that God has a purpose and a plan for everyone. Key quote from the Bible here, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. The idea that God has got this grand divine plan for every single person for all of creation, and that humans should not be trying to interfere with that. And then Genesis, a quote from Genesis, let us make mankind in our image. The idea that whatever life is giving you, it has been created by God in his image. And so we should accept what we've been given. God has clearly created us with deep value and deep holiness. And so we shouldn't be trying to alter God's image, because he is the omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent creator. That perhaps what a Christian would say on genetic engineering. Do remember there are mixed opinions on genetic engineering. Do be thinking, when you're thinking be thinking about compassion, love and kindness in that situation, and the idea of dominion. And then against, do be thinking about the idea of not interfering with God's plan, and where would it stop? How far can humans go, without misabusing the creation that God has designed and given to us. So we'll move on now to section 2 of our walking, talking mock paper on Unit 8. Which is environmental and medical issues. How exciting. And our first question is a B-type question. Do you think human beings are causing global warming? Give reasons for your point of view. So you could say here that yes, humans are polluting the atmosphere. We're putting profit before the planet in our use of things like fossil fuels, releasing CO2, which contributes to the greenhouse effect, which is causing global warming. And again, it could be about misusing natural resources and not being sustainable and being conscientious in how we are acting and how we are using the finite resources, and how we are using, say, technology and, say, cars and things in modern life without thinking about the effects that our actions will have if we are not sustainable. So that's quite a secular question, really. That means it's not really involved with religion. You could drop in religious teaching there, but I do think that if you do give 2 good reasons there why humans are causing global warming, you can still get the full marks. Remember, on a C and a D question, it is vital that you are relentlessly using religious teaching. So we will move to a C question now, and it is explain how religious teachings encourage people to care for the world. Note that I have highlighted on our mock exam paper the word religious, just to reinforce to you that we are looking for both Christian and Islamic views. So we will start with the Islamic views, and first of all, Muslims believe they are God's caliphs. That basically means that they are God's stewards. They are guardians of his creation, specially appointed to care for creation, and crucially that they will then be judged on Judgment Day on how well they have cared for creation. Within Islam, there is an idea that there will be a Judgment Day, and that all the people who have done good will have their names recorded on the right-hand side of a book, and all those who have done bad will have their name recorded on the left-hand side of a book. And the idea is that if a Muslim isn't a good Khalifa, if they are not a good carer for the world, that's linking it back to the question, then they will be put on the left-hand side of the book. They will be judged in a negative way, and so they will not be permitted entrance to paradise, to eternal life, a key religious Islamic belief. What would a Christian say? Well, Christians would use the quote on dominion. May they rule over all the creatures. The idea again that God has ordained his people as stewards, and so they have a responsibility, we can use that for the Khalifa idea as well, to care for the world and to look after all people, all things, and the world itself. The idea of this special responsibility given to humans to care for the world. Key really at the moment is Pope Francis, the leader of the Catholic Church, has released what's called an encyclical. That's a key Christian Catholic teaching, and in which it's called Laudato Si, and it is on care for the environment, so a really topical issue. And in it he writes, from the Creator a common gift, nature. So the idea that the world has been given to Christians as a gift. I'll repeat that. From the Creator a common gift, nature. So we have all been given this gift of nature. And so if you've been given a gift, you need to care for it. Remember the parable of the sheep and the goats that say that all those that do good will go to heaven, all those who do bad will go to hell. So based on how you care for this gift of the world is really going to determine how a Christian feels they will be judged by God when it comes to deciding whether they go to eternal life or whether they are condemned for eternity. So some different ideas there. Very important you know that stewardship is key to Christian teaching and to Islamic teaching, and it's fundamentally all about the idea that a God has created this world and he has given humans, whether they're called caliphs or whether they're called stewards, some sort of control and some sort of responsibility, and that those religious believers think they will be judged on how well they have fulfilled their role as a carer, as a khalifa, as a steward of creation. So some really important and interesting bits of information there for us. We now move on to a A-type question. What is infertility? And to be infertile, to have infertility, is not being able to have children. This leads us nicely on to our B-type question here. Do you think Muslims should support fertility treatment? Give reasons for your point of view. And it's important that you know that childbirth and bringing a child up is very, very important for Muslims. It's something that brings a couple closer together and brings them fulfillment and happiness, that they're fulfilling their role during their time on earth. And so, this is key, Allah, the Muslim God, is seen to be compassionate and merciful. And so a Muslim may think it's the most compassionate and merciful thing to do to support fertility treatments so that Muslims can have children and fulfill what they feel is a real duty and a real privilege. So if you allow someone who is infertile to have children, it's a very compassionate and very merciful thing to do for them because of the happiness and joy and fulfillment that will bring them. However, it's important you know that Muslims do view some sorts of fertility treatment, such as the donation of sperm or egg, and surrogacy as adultery. So they see some types of fertility treatment as adultery, which is of course a big sin in Islam, and so it is not permissible. So do remember that some types of fertility treatment, such as surrogacy, are seen as adultery, which is a sin in Islam. It's against the law, the idea of God. Another quote you could use is that it is Allah who gives life and causes death. This is a quote from the Quran. So the idea that it is God, Allah, who is in complete control of who is given life. So we shouldn't be interfering. If God hasn't given a Muslim couple the ability to have children, that is his will. It is he who gives life. The idea we shouldn't be interfering. He has some other divine purpose or plan for that couple. We move on to a D mark question now, and it is a quote: religious people should support transplant surgery. And we are asked, do you agree? Remember, we're talking about religious people, so we can refer to Christian teaching and Islamic teaching. So first of all, let's start with some Christian ideas. It's a very compassionate thing to do. Remember, situation ethics teaches a Christian to do the most loving thing in that situation. Also, quite a perceptive point I can give you here is that the body is not needed for heaven. There's a quote from the Bible, from Jesus, that says, sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. The idea there's no correlation between what you physically have and what you can have in an afterlife. So the idea you do not need all your organs, you do not need all your body in order to enter afterlife. It's about the goodness you do through your actions and through the legacy you leave behind, as opposed to the physical things that you have. So the idea the body's not needed for heaven, and so after death, a compassionate thing you can do is have your organs donated to those who need them. And also the idea, love your neighbour as yourself. If you would want, your life to be saved through a transplant surgery, then you should do the same for others. And the idea, may they rule over, they may rule over all the creatures. That quote from Genesis, that humans have been given dominion, they've been given this responsibility, they've been given this leadership, and they should use that to help others. And if we've developed the technology and medical advances in order to be able to do things like transplant surgery, then what's stopping us? We've been given this dominion, this responsibility. Let's use it to do good for other human beings. So why might someone disagree that religious people should support transplant surgery? I'm referring to that quote I keep using from the Quran again. It is He, Allah, who gives life and causes death. The idea that God is omnipotent, He's all-powerful, and He should be in control. It is He who gives life and causes death. So we shouldn't be interfering with what God's great plan for His universe is. Same idea in Christian teaching from the Bible. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Again, that idea there is a grand plan that God has for each human being, and interfering with things like transplant surgery may be interfering with that divine plan for each human life. It is not our place to interfere, a Christian may say. And key in Islam, some Muslims believe that the body needs all its organs, it needs to be intact in order to be raised. It's a key Islamic belief that there will be a resurrection of all bodies. On the last day, all bodies will be resurrected and will go to heaven, or will be judged, whether you can go to paradise or you will be condemned. The idea that if the body is to be resurrected, a key Islamic idea, that the organs all need to be intact in the body on the last day. So of course, then transplant surgery, you can't be removing them, because then you couldn't have resurrection. That's something that many Muslims do believe. So a key teaching for you there. Moving on to section 3 of our walking talking mock on unit 8, and it is a B-type question. Why do you think wars occur? Give reasons for your points of view. Remember, it is 2 points with 2 explanations. Many ideas that you could give. You could refer to a current situation, such as the Darfur conflict or the Syrian conflict currently ongoing. You could talk about it's out of self-defense, it's as a result of injustice or a response to aggression or hatred. It could be due to persecution, it could be as a response to exploitation, it could be over resources such as oil reserves, it could be over money between like armed militias, or it could be over land, such as a dispute over borders between countries. Any of these and many more could be examples that you use to say why you think wars occur. As long as you justify your reason, that's all that you need to do. We've got an A-type question for you now. It is, what is just war theory? And just war theory is the idea that a war should be fought with the right reasons in the right way. So there must be the right reasons for the war, and it must be fought in the right way. And this is an ancient theory that was first proposed by St. Thomas Aquinas, a key figure within the Christian church. So let me talk to you about what we mean when we say the right reasons and in the right way, because this could very easily be an 8-mark question. So what we mean is there should be a reasonable chance of success. Peace should be the aim. It should be done as a last resort. It should be done in a fair and reasonable way. There must be a just cause, so the reason that it's being started must be just. And at all times, civilians must be protected. Now, it's important you know that just war theory has been used by both sides on conflicts, and it has been manipulated, so you can't quite know whether it is being used correctly. It can be abused to sort of support both sides, which of course means that someone is sort of lying or twisting it in order to get just war theory to support what they're saying. So it can be manipulated and abused as a theory. But the basic principle is that a war should be fought for the right reasons, so the right intentions as a last resort, with the idea of protecting civilians and restoring peace, and in the right way. It must be done with sort of a fair and reasonable idea about it, and that civilians must be protected. So that's just war theory. And then what is the United Nations is our next question. The UN is an international body set up after World War II to promote peace and cooperation. I do believe there is about 192 member states in the UN, so it's sort of a body of countries who come together to cooperate and to ensure peace in the world. So we move on now to a C-mark question, and we can use just war theory as our response here. It is explained why some religious people support war and some do not. So there are different views within religions and between religions over war, whether it can ever be acceptable or in some circumstances where war can be justified. So let me start with the reasons someone would not support a war. So someone who is religious, Christian or Islamic, would not support war. We'll start with some key Christian quotes. And on the Sermon on the Mount, this was a key moment in Jesus' teaching. Jesus said, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Okay, blessed are the peacemakers. So he was essentially saying that the peacemakers, those who make peace, are to be called the children of God. He said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." So if you are bringing peace, if you are ensuring peace, then you are acting like a child of God, which is of course something that a Christian would want to do. So the idea that war, which of course is the opposite to peace, is not fulfilling your role as a peacemaker, and so you cannot be called a child of God. That's from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus also said, "Pray for those who persecute you." So that our response to those who persecute us, say for example one side of the conflict, should not to be responding with weapons and war and murder, but instead with something like prayer, which is very peaceful. So instead of war, you should pray for those who persecute you. That was a key quote from Jesus. And then we've got some Islamic ideas on why you should not support war. The word Islam itself means peace, showing the religion is all about peace, which of course is in contradiction to the idea of war, which is the opposite of peace. Allah is known as compassionate and merciful. If you're going to be compassionate and merciful, I wouldn't be thinking that you are going to be launching a war or you're going to be engaging in armed combat. So the idea that we should show compassion and mercy instead of war and violence. And the quote that I do like to refer to a lot, the idea, "Take not life which Allah has made sacred." So I referred earlier in this revision tutorial to this quote, to the idea that all life is precious, all life is holy, and the idea that if you are engaged in war, you are likely to be taking and harming that life, which is violating the sanctity of life. You can use that in a Christian response as well, the idea that all life is holy and belongs to God. The sanctity of life is applicable in both of the major religions. So let's now take a look at the other side of the argument. Why would someone who's religious support war? Well, St. Paul, remember a key Christian figure, said submit to the governing authorities. So if a country declares war, he is suggesting, he wasn't making this specific to war, but you could say his teaching suggests that you should support that. Also in Islam, it's crucial that you support the governing authorities. So someone who is either Christian or Islamic should support their government. So the idea that if the government declares war, then you should support it. Submit to the governing authorities. Follow their rules. Follow what they're doing. So if they declare war, you should support it. And also, of course, just war theory. The idea of just war theory is actually saying that war can be fought, even if it is with the right reasons in the right way. Important that you know that's by St. Thomas Aquinas. So the idea that in certain circumstances war is permissible based on just war theory. The same idea is seen in Islam. It's known as the lesser jihad. So the idea, again, that in certain circumstances war is permissible. And indeed in Islam, in the Quran teachings, it does say that if you are killed in a just war, you will go straight to heaven. So if you're killed in a just war, you will go straight to heaven. So that's something that Muslims may have in their minds. What is a just war in Islam? One reason is to fight if attacked. So remember, the lesser jihad is the idea of a just war in Islam, and the reasons for a war include fighting if attacked, fighting to defend the faith. And remember, the Quran teaches that if a Muslim is killed in a just war, they will go straight to heaven. So that's another idea about why someone who is Christian, so submit to the governing authorities, or someone who is Islamic, you know, for example, if you're killed in a just war, you go to heaven. So let us proceed onwards then, shall we? And we have got another C-type question, no rest for the wicked. Explain why the followers of Islam are against bullying. Quite a tricky question, this one, actually, to get your 4 marks with your explanations. Let's get kicking off then, shall we? Allah is compassionate and merciful, as I do like to keep telling you. So the idea that if you are bullying, you are clearly not showing compassion or mercy to the person who you are bullying and showing hatred towards. So of course that would be wrong if you are seeking to please Allah and follow his example, and Muslims do describe him as compassionate and merciful. A new key quote for you here from the Islamic faith: paradise is for the righteous. A key quote in Islam: paradise is for the righteous. This is, I do believe, I've taken that from the Quran. So the idea that those who behave correctly and in a just way, in a kind way, you know, following what is acceptable, they will be rewarded in paradise. Of course, something like bullying, where you're taking advantage of, you're persecuting, hurting someone else, is clearly not righteous, and so your reward will not be in paradise. That, of course, will be something very, very important for a Muslim. And the idea that there will be a judgment day when the names of those who've done good will be on the right hand side of the book, those who have done bad will be on the left hand side of the book, and people will be judged on how they've behaved. This is so important. So if you're doing things like bullying, it's not just going to be got away with, it will be held to account. You will be held to account and held responsible for the way you have behaved by God. And that, for Muslims, is of course going to be an absolutely key point. And if I refer you to the quote, life which Allah has made sacred, so Allah has made sacred, the idea that life is sacred, again the principle of sanctity of life, and so Allah's creation should not be abused. There's also a quote from the Quran which says, it is He who created you from a single person. The idea that Allah, God, has created every single person. And so in order to respect and show an appreciation for Allah, the Creator, Muslims should always be showing a respect and appreciation for his creation, which is of course human beings. And so bullying contradicts the idea of showing respect and appreciation for other people, the creation of the great Creator, who will judge on Judgment Day, according to Islamic belief. So just some key ideas about why the followers of Islam are against bullying. Let me summarise that for you. And remember, you could use these ideas if something else or something similar comes up. The idea that Allah is always known as compassionate and merciful. The idea that paradise is for the righteous, those who behave correctly. Linking that to the idea of a judgment day, that people will be held to account for how they have behaved. And the idea that Allah has made life sacred. Keyword, sacred. The idea it is precious, it is holy, and must be respected, appreciated, and cared for. You could also use the idea of being a Khalifa, of being a good steward here, saying you're not being a good Khalifa, not caring for creation. Remember, creation does involve human beings if you are bullying, for example. So we continue our look at section 3 with the B-type question. Do you think religion can cause conflict within a family? Give reasons for your point of view. So why might religion cause conflict within a family? There are key ideas really. It could be social behaviour. So it could be the fact that a teenager is going out drinking and having sex at the weekends, which of course may really not be in tune with the beliefs, the religious beliefs that say their parents or their grandparents have. That may cause conflict or arguments. The idea that both religions teach their followers to bring up their children in the faith. The idea that a parent should raise their child in that faith. So, for example, take them to church, send them to a religious school, you know, take them through the sacraments. And if that child rejects the religion, if they don't believe in God, you know, they want to convert, that may cause dispute and sort of unhappiness, because the parent feels they're failing in their duty to make their child know God, but at the same time that child feels they're being forced into something they really don't want to be part of. And so there's going to be that real dispute between the two. And of course, things like marriage. If you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend who is outside of the faith of your family, that may cause upset and dispute. For example, if you went on to have marriage, you know, where is the marriage taking place? Which religion would the children and so the grandchildren be brought up in? And that could cause conflict, upset, disagreement and dispute. So it's all about sort of the idea of going against what religion the family have, or behaving in a way that's not seen as acceptable to the religion of the wider family, and then how people would be able to resolve those differences, or what sort of barriers and issues it may cause for the family unit. And just concluding our look at section 3, we have a keyword alert. What is forgiveness? And forgiveness is stopping blaming someone for what they have done wrong. So it's stopping blaming someone for what they have done wrong. The end of sort of holding them, you know, holding them to account, the end of blaming them for it, moving on. Why would someone who's religious support the idea of forgiveness? In Christianity, Jesus said, forgive not 7 but 77 times. So the idea that if you want to be forgiven, you should always keep forgiving. The idea that we should be compassionate and never tire of showing forgiveness to others. And then in Islam, key quote for you here from the Surah, part of the religious documents. It says, if a person forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from God. I'll repeat that for you. If a person forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from God. So if someone forgives and someone makes reconciliation, they will be rewarded by God. So the idea that the way you act now will lead to greater reward in another life, or in this lifetime, only that reward will come from a greater power. So the idea that forgiveness is vital and reconciliation is vital for a Muslim based on the teaching of their religious text. Important, another word associated with forgiveness is reconciliation. Reconciliation is bringing people back together. So it's not just stopping blaming them, it's actually bringing people back together, to sort of being able to actually move on and reunite after whatever has happened. Remember that quote from the Surah, Islamic religious document, if a person forgives and makes reconciliation, his reward is due from God. So you will be rewarded if you are Islamic and you forgive and reconcile with others. And again, the idea, forgive not 7 but 77 times in the Christian religion. The idea that you should never cease to forgive. Let's move on then, shall we, to section 4. We're almost there. And we are straight into a question of A type. What is the law? The law is rules made by Parliament, enforceable by police and the courts. Okay, so it's rules that are made by Parliament, applicable to everybody in the country, that are enforced, so actually people who are ensuring it's happening, or that people are following the rules, enforceable by police and law courts. So what do you think is the best form of punishment? That's our B-type question here. Give 2 reasons for your point of view. So let me talk you through the key theories of punishment. We have deterrence, retribution, protection and rehabilitation. Let me start you at the top. Let me start you with deterrence. It's the idea that punishment should deter people from doing something again, or from doing it in the first place. So for example, to stop people murdering, you may put capital punishment in place for murder. The idea that if you take life, yours will be taken, and so you're going to be scared, you're going to be fearful, and you're going to be reluctant to, for example, kill, because you know the consequences you will face. Alternatively, it's the idea that someone's done something wrong, so then you punish them in a way that will deter them from doing it again. So for example, you lock them in prison so they don't want to go back there, so they don't do that action again when they are released. So deterrence is all about stopping something from happening in the first place, by the idea of making an example to wider society, or stopping someone doing something again. It's deterring them. Retribution, when you hear that word, always think of revenge. It's about the idea of an eye for an eye. If someone kills, they should be killed. They should face capital punishment. So it's taking revenge. It's doing justice, if you like, for what a criminal has done. And it does give the victim or the victim's family a feeling of justice when they see the same proportion of punishment given to the person who's committed the crime as what happened to the victim of their attack or their behaviour. This is a Quran quote I'm giving to you now. As to the thief, cut off their hands. So we're going to punish you for what you've done. You've used your hands to steal, and now we're going to cut them off. So not only is that going to deter them from doing it again, unless they can steal with, say, the feet, but it's also going to sort of punish them. It's going to, give to them what they have done. Of course, that's quite controversial. It is very controversial. The idea an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. I remember I gave you that quote a little bit earlier, that we should, from the Bible, overcome evil with good. So that we should respond to sort of acts of great evil that we know are wrong with sort of goodness, with love, with kindness and compassion. That we shouldn't stoop to that level and just go for an eye, because, as the famous quote is, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. The idea we need to rise above it and act in a way that leads the way with compassion, kindness, and leading with goodness, as opposed to just being on that same level of evil. It is a controversial issue. Then we have protection, the idea that punishment should be about protecting society from harm. So, for example, locking up a dangerous murderer so they cannot do it again. It's about protecting the people in society from harm that that person could cause. And then we have rehabilitation, the idea that the aim of punishment should be to reform and educate someone who has done wrong. So you teach them the error of their ways, you teach them new skills, new ideas, new ways of living in a peaceful, cohesive with society way, and then you can actually release them back into society. They can put something back into the community. So punishment shouldn't just be about punishing, it should be about changing, it should be about educating, it should be about reforming someone so they can go back out into the world and actually make a difference. There are lots and lots of different views for these different theories of punishment. We're asked in this question to say which one we think is the best. So if you were saying that deterrence is the best, you could say because it stops people acting in a certain way or acting in a certain way again. So it's protecting people and it's sending a clear message to society. If you were saying retribution, you could say it gives a feeling of justice to the victim or the victim's family. If you are saying protection, you could say because it protects society, and that should always be sort of the key aim of punishment. Or you could say rehabilitation, because we're not just locking someone away and spending taxpayers' money on, say, feeding them and keeping them in their prison cell, and we're not just stooping to their level and, say, killing them with capital punishment. We're actually rising above what they've done. We're educating and reforming them so they can actually give something back to society. And surely that makes much more of a difference than just, punishing them with retribution or any of the other forms of punishment, which focus really on just making them see what they've done and just leaving them to be punished. Whereas rehabilitation is a very active form where you're taking that person and saying, right, we're going to change your ways and make you a better person. Does it work? That's a conversation for another day. But there are lots of different views on those 4 theories of punishment. Which one do you think a religious believer would most support? That's something to have a think about. Put into account, of course, the idea of Jesus showing love and compassion, but also Sharia law, which does support capital punishment. We're going to be moving on to that in just a minute, so hold those thoughts. First of all, we've got a B-type question, which is, do you think it is important for religious people to work for justice? Give 2 reasons for your point of view. So, first of all, what is justice? And justice is the due allocation of reward and punishment. It's a maintenance of what is right. So when you think of justice, you should always think of what is just, what is right, so what is fair. So let's take a look, shall we? So why should a religious person work for justice? Well, I've got a key Islamic quote to start us off, and it is, judge with justice. It couldn't really be any clearer. Judge with justice. That's a key quote from the Quran. So the idea that Muslims should judge with justice in a fair way. It should always be fair. It should be just. So if you're judging, it must be done with justice. That's why you should work for justice. Another Quran quote, paradise is for the righteous. The idea that those that do good, those that behave morally, those that judge with justice, that work for a just and fair world, are seen as righteous because they're doing the right thing, and they will therefore be rewarded in paradise. And also the idea that Muslims are God's caliphs, so they need to create a just and fair world where everybody is sort of valued and treated with the kindness and respect that we would expect they deserve. And that is, of course, working for justice, ensuring that they are treated justly and fairly, fulfilling that duty as a caliph. What about Christian views on justice? You could use the golden rule to do to others what you would have them do to you. The idea that it is just if you are treated in the way you treat others. We need to ensure that everybody is treated with justice, because I'm sure that we would ourselves. The idea that God is just. God is seen as a just being, and so everyone should behave in the same way. The idea that on Judgment Day, God will judge everyone, so he will take everybody, look at how they've behaved and judge them justly on their actions, and then decide whether, as the parable of the sheep and the goat says, they are rewarded in heaven or they're condemned to an idea of hell. The idea that on Judgment Day you will be judged on how you behave. God will judge justly on that day, so we should ensure there is justice in the world now, today. So some key teachings there on why religious people should work for justice. The idea they have a responsibility to create a just and fair world, and the idea that we will be judged justly, so we should do the same and create a just world too. Moving on to a D-type question for us now, and it is a statement that religious people should never support the death penalty. Do you agree with this statement? So why would a religious person agree with that statement? Well, they may use the quote from St. Paul, submit to the governing authorities. The idea that if it's the law of the land, for example in parts of America, then they should support it. They should be supporting that country's or that state's laws, rules and regulations. And so if capital punishment is part of that area's system of punishment and justice, they should be supporting it. The idea, submit to the governing authorities. That's by St. Paul, that quote. The Quran, as we know, says judge with justice. The idea of eye for an eye. The Quran does say, as to the feast, cut off their hands. So Sharia law is all about giving sort of justice in quite an equal proportion. Do know that Sharia law does support capital punishment. Sharia law is Islamic law. It's a law that's founded upon the teachings of Islam. And in Islamic countries, it is the law that is enforced. So it is sort of a religious law. And that does state that as to the feast, cut off their hands. So the idea that retribution, the idea that punishment should fit the crime, and say in certain cases the death penalty may be applicable. The idea from the Quran, judge with justice. The idea of being proportionate between what's been done and what the person faces as a consequence. Not all Muslims do support capital punishment, of course. Remember, we have that quote about Allah, that he's compassionate and merciful, and say the idea of supporting the death penalty may contradict the idea of showing compassion and mercy to all, no matter what they've done. Do know that the Old Testament and the Quran both say that capital punishment can be used. Of course, the Old Testament part of the Bible, the Christian holy book, and the Quran, the Islamic holy book. So these ancient texts, these holy books, which are key to both religions, do say that capital punishment can be used, and there is usage of it in these holy books. So it's important you know that they do contain ideas that are sort of supportive of capital punishments, at least in the Old Testament of the Bible. So why would a religious person not support the death penalty, capital punishment? Of course, we have the classic do not kill from the Decalogue, and of course capital punishment is, no matter what that person's done to deserve it, it is still killing, and it is violation of do not kill. An Islamic person who is going against the death penalty may say, take not life which Allah has made sacred. Again, that quote from the Quran, that all life is sacred and has been gifted by Allah, so it should not in any circumstance be taken by human beings. That's violating the sanctity of life. That could also be used as a Christian idea against capital punishment. And the idea an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. So capital punishment isn't really going to achieve anything. We see that in countries where it's used, it doesn't really deter people from committing crimes. All it does is really have a sense of retribution about it. But an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. Surely we could rehabilitate and sort of restore someone, or we should try to. We should show that compassion and that mercy instead of eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. So there are just some ideas about why a religious person, remember we're thinking sanctity of life, the idea do not kill or take not life which Allah has made sacred, and the idea eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, against capital punishment, and then supportive of it. It is used by both in both the Old Testament and the Quran, and the idea we should submit to governing authorities, and if that's part of a law or Sharia law in Islam, which is a religious holy law, then it should be supported by the individual. And finally, we go on to question C, which is explain some of the different religious attitudes towards drugs and alcohol. Now, let me start you off with the key Islamic beliefs. These are very simple to get your head around, so do listen up. It is quite simple. Drugs and alcohol are haram. They are forbidden. H-A-R-A-M, haram. It means they are completely forbidden in Islam. They are not acceptable. They are seen, well, alcohol is seen as the mother of all sins by Muhammad. So it's important you know drugs and alcohol are haram. They are forbidden in Islam. Why is this? Well, they stop Muslims from being a good Khalifa, it is believed. If you are, say, intoxicated, if you are drunk, you are unable to fulfill your duty as a Khalifa, as a carer, as a steward, as a guardian over creation. Some Muslims also believe that having drugs and alcohol allows the devil to tempt you away from God. It stops you engaging in prayer. A massive part of a Muslim's life, Muslims pray several times a day, and obviously if they're intoxicated they are going to be unable to fulfill this duty. So they believe that drugs and alcohol are used by the devil to tempt Muslims away from God and stop them connecting with him and fulfilling their religious duties at the set times throughout the day. So they are some ideas. It is a great sin in the religion, basically because of the fact that it changes your mind, changes your thinking, which stops you from being that good Khalifa at all times, and of course allows the devil to sort of tempt a Muslim, they may say, away from their religious duties and from knowing and serving God at all times, which is fundamental. What about Christians? They have a more mixed message. Remember, Muslims are completely against drugs and alcohol. They are haram. They are forbidden, not allowed. It is a mixed message really from Christianity because, of course, wine was used at the Last Supper. You know, Jesus, he dished it out. Water was turned into wine by Jesus. You know, if he didn't want people drinking alcohol, he wouldn't be turning that water into wine. Probably turn it into something like fruit juice. Do you know what I mean? Don't put that in the exam, obviously. And the Bible does not forbid alcohol. However, it is dangerous, and St. Paul said the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. So the idea that you can cause harm to your body, which is seen as the temple of the Holy Spirit, and obviously if you're doing that, you're going to be sort of harming yourself, and that's sort of disrespecting the Creator who has lovingly created you, and then you are harming your holy, precious, deeply, deeply valuable life and your body, if you like, through taking substances and drinking alcohol. And the idea that you have a responsibility to be a steward as a Christian. Remember St. Teresa of Avila, Christ has no body but yours. And if you are intoxicated, if you are drunk, are you going to be able to behave in a Christ-like, compassionate, really responsible way, caring for others if they need to care for you because of the way you have drank and you have used drugs, for example. But remember, Christians are sort of split. I think they are on the whole supportive of drinking alcohol. Drugs, not so much. They say, you know, as I will use this quote, once again, submit to the governing authorities. The idea that if they are illegal in that country, a Christian should not be using them, because you should be following the law of the land. And the idea that, say, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, so it shouldn't be abused and sort of destroyed through your use of intoxicants and other things that will harm the body. So that brings us to an end of this hour of RE Joy, looking at GCSE RE Unit 8 in a walking, talking mock style. Do make sure you go over and review everything we have looked at over the past hour in this walking, talking mock. And please remember that this isn't everything that is going to be on the paper. This is just a selection of questions designed to help you revise some of the key topics that may come up in the test. It is important that you remember some of the key quotes that I've given you, such as blessed are the peacemakers, for they should be called the children of God, take not life which Allah has made sacred, and other key quotes like this, Christ has no body but yours, judge with justice, paradise is for the righteous. So from both Christianity and Islam, remember key quotes that you can apply to different themes and different sections throughout the Unit 8 exam. But very, very best of luck. Thank you so much for your time. I do hope you've got something out of it. If you have, please do let me know. Please do get in touch and tell me how you get on with the exam. Very best wishes. Thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.